Good afternoon, church. Pastor Keven Newsome here again with our final session on generational ministry and the generational influence on the church, past, present, and future. And today we're going to talk about strategies. We are going to kind of summarize a lot of what we've already been talking about with the characteristics of the generations and the cycles and everything, and what we've learned about these interactions with each generation, and sort of kind of boil this down into what does this mean for the church and what does this mean for us as Christians, and how we can do daily ministry, how we can do ministry together as a church, and some of the strategies we can do to prepare ourselves not only for today but also for the future and the generations to come. So that's what this last session is about, and so we're going to start with looking at the silent generation. So just a quick overview for the silent generation. So the silent generation prefers generational inclusiveness and not generational specific ministry. They believe unity is best seen when the church is together. And so as a result, they enjoy the corporate gatherings more than they do small groups, and they enjoy seeing younger generations join them in these large gatherings. They work well in administrative roles. And as they age, they'll need opportunities to continue to nurture and help the church to the best of their ability. And they will need help keeping their environment from changing too fast. That characteristic of stability is at play here, and so the church will need to help to provide this stability, even if they have trouble with change. Even if they recognize the need for change, they will still have trouble accepting change and adapting to it. So remember, stability in their environment is directly tied to their identity. And if they lose their stability, they feel like they are losing their identity. So this idea of church change should not come at the expense of their stability, and thereby basically eroding their sense of identity. Rather, they should be given some form of an environment that is sort of insulated from some of this church change climate. Allow them some form of stability where some of the things that they enjoy doing stays the same. So there's some form of active traditional programming that they're used to and that they can identify with will help this age group feel like they are still important and still involved with the vision of the church. When talking about spiritual matters, emphasis needs to be made on the stability and sufficiency of God. And remember that they feel the weight of this current crisis era more than people realize. They came of age during a high era, and so they know not only what it was like to live in a stable culture or stable environment in our country, but also they know what it's like to live in stability as far as the church is concerned. So they feel what's going on, the weight of it, a lot more than we realize. When it comes to some specific strategies, when we talk about for the silent generation, so when I say for the silent generation, I'm going to do this for each generation. What this means is what can other generations do for this generation? And what we can do is basically to work to maintain their stability, to help them feel stable, and to not feel like their sense of identity is eroding, to not change for the sake of change, to always, if change is necessary, to make sure there's a well thought out biblical reason to do that and that they understand that. And we need to emphasize the stability and sufficiency of God when talking about biblical matters and spiritual matters, especially with those who are not churched. To the silent generation, so what I'm doing here is I'm speaking directly to those who are part of this generation. Those in silent generation need to recognize that some change does need to come. The world is not what it used to be. The world has changed, and the world is changing faster than we can actually keep up, especially right now in 2020. Change does need to come. And so the silent generation should be willing to allow unbiblical and irrelevant things and traditions to sort of fade away. Let the younger generations come in with more biblical ways of doing things. Silent generation should work to understand the millennial generation mindset. Millennial generation grew up in a completely different world than the silent generation grew up in, and they don't understand each other a lot. And so the silent generation needs to try to understand at least very much, at least the least should be that they should admit that ministry today is very different than when the silent generation came of age. What worked in the 40s and the 50s does not work today. And so the millennial generation needs new ways of doing ministry to the world. Now the Bible doesn't change. The gospel doesn't change. What does change is the way we present these things to a world that thinks very differently than it used to 50 years ago, 60 years ago, 70 years ago. And so some of these strategies that we use need to evolve. And so the silent generation just needs to recognize that, admit that, and allow these younger generations to experiment and to try some new things to better get the gospel message out to the world. Moving on to the baby boomer generation, their major characteristic is control, and so they need a task to control. They will need continued areas of responsibility even after transitioning out of leadership. Remember that boomers they love to feel useful in the church. They that sense of control, that idea of control is ingrained in them. So they need to feel like they are involved in the control of transitioning out of leadership. They need to feel like they are involved in training their replacements. They need to feel like they are involved in helping to bring change about. As long as a boomer has some sense of control, which is intrinsically tied to their identity, then they will feel valued by the church. When talking of spiritual matters, emphasis needs to be made in God's control over their lives. And so when we talk about for the boomer generation, what generations can do for them is to generate deep Bible studies beyond surface level. Baby boomers want sort of this. They want some deep theological things that aren't generally taught. They long to learn some of the deeper mysteries that are in the Bible. They need to be given task control. They need that sense of identity, and the form of control needs to be retained. And they need to be involved with change. So we need to allow them to sort of be involved and have a voice in the way change is brought about. To the boomer generation, I would say, speaking to baby boomers, become mentors. This is your opportunity to be a mentor to the younger generations, to train your replacements. And we know that baby boomers feel like that nobody else is going to be able to do it as well as they do. Well, if you train them, then they will. Seek out Gen Xers and try to heal that generational wound. We talked about the generational wound between baby boomers and Gen Xers, and Gen Xers feel like establishments that are run by baby boomers are hostile to them. So baby boomers should find ways to seek out Generation X and to try to include them and to make them feel valued, to make Generation X feel valued and loved. When Generation Xers do get involved, baby boomers need to remember that that's time to step back. Those Gen Xers are looking at the baby boomer generation for validation in ways that they don't even recognize that they're doing. They're looking. Baby boomers are the parent generation of Gen Xers, and so when they get involved, they're looking at how the baby boomers are going to react. And so baby boomers have a lot of influence in how that Gen Xer is going to continue, going to proceed with what they're doing, whether they're going to quit or whether they're going to thrive. And so baby boomers should take extra care with Gen Xers who are involved to build them up, not to criticize them, not to tear them down. Moving on to Generation X, their major characteristic is respect. And so they need repeated reminders that they are respected and loved by the church and respected and loved by God. They're open to apologetic evangelism because they are the first postmodern generation. When talking about strategies in the church, low hype, high tech, creative strategies that are relational in nature tend to draw them in. I'm not saying those are the best strategies for a church. I'm just saying that these are the things that we have seen, the church has seen sort of draw in Generation X. It's not necessarily what will keep them, but it may be the thing that draws them in. Baby boomers should again work hard to show this generation respect, and Generation X may be more responsive to community events rather than in-church programming. There's this idea of hypocrisy that is very ingrained in Generation X, and a lot of it may be baby boomer related, in that they've seen sort of this. If you remember when we talked about baby boomers and we talked about Generation X, there was this hypocrisy in a lot of cases that was seen when Gen X was growing up. They were brought to church and they were heavily involved in church, but when they came home, a lot of baby boom parents didn't bring those same things home. And so Generation X grew up seeing their parents behave one way at church and then behave a completely different way at home or a different way at work. And so they saw a hypocrisy when they were growing up. So they're very sensitive to this sort of hypocrisy in the church. They may come to church thinking that everybody they interact with at church is doing that just at church, and when they go home, they behave they behave differently. So they are very sensitive to hypocrisy. They need to know that this is not what defines a Christian, that this is not what it means to be a church. And so they may be more responsive to community events rather than asking them to come to the church. If the church went out into the community, went out into homes and had Bible studies, and they got to see Christians behaving in their own homes and behaving in the community in a way that reflects what they've seen in churches, in a way that's basically different than what they grew up seeing from they may have grown up seeing from their parents, that will go a long way with bridging the gap with them between what is real and what they perceive as being the hypocrisy in church. And a lot of times we need to change the conversation when we talk to Gen Xers, and we need to take this idea of church, because of this whole hypocrisy, this hypocrisy thing that they're sensitive to. We need to take the word church out of the conversation and have conversations with them directly about their relationship with God, so that they know their relationship with God and their perception of church are two completely different things. And so we focus on their relationship with God when we're trying to reach them. We're trying to get them involved in doing the mission of the church. We focus on their relationship with God. And by doing that, we build within and we disciple them to understand what it means to be a real church. And so when they come into a church, they're not just soured to hypocrisy. They're more equipped to see the brokenness in a church, and they're more willing to help repair some of this brokenness rather than run away from the church and just say the church is full of hypocrites. So focus on their relationship with God, and take the word church and their perception of church out of the conversation. For the Gen Xers, keep technology updated. Find ways to get out of the church building. I talked about that just then. Use apologetic curriculum. Don't overhype the church. Be genuine. There we go with that idea of hypocrisy again. And take the word church out of the conversation. To the Gen Xers, I would say stop waiting. Get involved. The church is not what you think it is. The church is not defined by the hypocrisy of individuals. The church is something that was founded by Jesus. Study the Bible, learn what it means to be a church first, and then help to effect a meaningful change to help repair some of the brokenness that's inside the church. Work to forgive baby boomers for the generational wounds. Work to forgive hypocrisy and things that were done in the name of church. Don't push change unless it's biblical. Just because you walk into a traditional situation, traditional setting, doesn't mean that the people there are wrong for doing that. Really work at learning the heart of what's going on, the heart of the people. Get to know the people. Get to know the genuineness behind it. It's not about what they do, it's about why they do it. And prove that you can be the leader that God created you to be. Generation X, we need you in leadership roles in the church. Millennial generation, their major characteristic is inclusion. They want solid answers to tough questions. They don't want the church to shy away from the things that are difficult. They want genuineness, not superficial. They were taught about genuineness from their Gen X parent generation. And so they seek out this genuineness when looking for churches. They seek churches that focus on inclusion. That's their major characteristics, part of their identity. And if they come into a church and they see exclusion for any reason, then they will probably not return to that church. So when talking about spiritual matters, emphasize the inclusion aspect of the gospel. They will engage in evangelism that has social and community impact. This is a very social-minded generation, and they want to see their church caring about the community, not just trying to recruit people to fill the pews, not just trying to convert more people to become Christians, and just baptizing them and handing them a Bible and saying good luck with your new faith. They want to see the church concerned about changing the community to be better, and they want to see the church using the gospel to do that, but not just handing them a gospel tract and saying good luck. They want the church to be involved with their community and to be concerned with these social and community issues. Again, with this millennial conversation, we make the conversation more about God and less about church. And the silent generation should remember that millennial Christians approach church differently. It's necessary. The world in 2020 is vastly different than it was in the 1940s and the 1950s. Our approach to reaching people has to change. We have to do things a little bit differently. We have to talk a little bit differently. The gospel hasn't changed, but our methods have, and the silent generation should help the millennials, help to equip the millennials to do that. For the millennial generation, we need to be transparent. We need to be genuine. We need to show concern for the community. We need to deal with our inclusiveness issues. If a church still has issues, whether they are issues of race, issues of social elitism, issues of generational conflict, issues of gender conflict, The church needs to deal with those issues. A millennial is going to be very sensitive to issues of exclusivity, and the church needs to be prepared to give honest answers to difficult questions. To the millennial generation, I would say work to understand faith heritage and the value of tradition. There is value in setting up traditions that we can pass on to the next generation. Traditions that teach theology, that teach beliefs. We need to be passing on these things on to the next generation, and traditions are a great way to do that. Traditions can be broken. Traditions can break down over time. Traditions can lose their meaning. But there is value in traditions that retain their meaning. And so millennials should work to understand those things, and not seek to throw out every tradition they come across just because it is a tradition. Some of these traditions that have lost their value and lost their meaning, yes, maybe we should move on. Maybe we should establish some new traditions there. But we shouldn't throw everything out just because it is a tradition. Work to understand these faith heritages. Work to understand these traditions. Seek to evolve church using existing structures, and know that change takes time. Your older generations are going to have to be eased through the transition of change. Inclusion problems. Know this, millennials. Inclusion problems are, in a lot of cases, a relic from an older culture. Culture has changed. Older generations grew up in a different culture. That doesn't make the culture right. It just means that their culture that they grew up with was different. And so even if some of these older generations are ready and willing to admit to the error of their culture and the fact that they were wrong to feel these ways, or wrong to say these things, wrong to do these things, know that culture is such a hard thing to overcome, especially when it's a culture that you grew up with when you were coming of age. So it's going to be hard for them. They might struggle more than you realize with dealing with some of these inclusion issues. And so we need to help them and be patient with these older generations as we deal with inclusion issues, especially those that are having a hard time with it, and know that they're trying. They are really trying, even though it's difficult. They see what's going on. They know that these things need to be dealt with, and we should also celebrate those of these generations that have dealt with it and have been able to move on. Also, millennials need to know not to compromise on sound theology for the sake of inclusion. Our world is telling us inclusion ideas that don't jive well with the Bible. There are aspects of secular inclusion that are not biblical. And so we need to be very careful as we walk this line of inclusion, not to compromise on our theology, not to compromise on our beliefs, to set a standard of biblical inclusion that does not necessarily reflect secular inclusion. I think we can do that. It's going to be increasingly difficult as the years progress. It is increasingly difficult now to deal with inclusion issues in the church, such as the LGBTQ agenda. How do we deal with these inclusion issues over the next few years is going to be very difficult, because those things are going to continue to come after the church, and so we need to be careful not to compromise on what the Bible tells us, and not to compromise on our theology for the sake of appeasing secular inclusion. Generation Z. Major characteristics: security and comfort. They are struggling to find their identity and place in the world right now. They have never known a world that was not in conflict, both on a large scale and on a small scale. If you think about social media and just how angry people can be on social media. Though they spend time in isolation, a lot of them crave socialization. And the church shouldn't panic to fix something that's not broken because of this generation. Just because we don't understand this generation doesn't mean we need to try to fix this generation or fix what we do to reach this generation. They actually need consistency. They actually need stability. They need to see and they need to be taught what consistency and stability actually is. We need to emphasize the security and identity that's found in a relationship with Christ. Help them to understand what that means. For the Generation Z, help them feel safe, help them feel secure, challenge them to step out of their comfort zones and to try some new things, especially when it comes to leadership roles. Learn to speak their language of technology. They are digital natives. They learn this technology thing from the cradle. And so we need to learn to speak their language of technology. And we need to be strong examples that they can look up to. They don't see a lot of Christian examples in the world. We need to be those examples. To Generation Z, if any of you are in Generation Z watching this, just relax, just breathe. The world has been in a worse place than it is right now. Older generations have lived through it. Go ask them about it. Go ask the silent generation and the baby boomer generation what it was like to live through the Cold War. If you can find veterans of World War II and those that lived through the Great Depression, go ask them about it. The world has been in a worse place. It's going to be okay. We will get through this. The world will survive. And know that you can do more than you realize. The potential for Generation Z has no limit. There's so much potential with the technology and the resources that you have available. You can do and become just about anything you want to be. I'm going to mention that a little bit more in just a second. So take a chance on something. Find something that you want to be or become and take a chance and go try it. And also know this, real life is more important than digital life. Spend more time talking to people than texting to people. Those real life relationships are going to be far more valuable when you get older than your digital relationships. All right, so now for the whole church, let's talk about a few things for the whole church. We're going to break this down in some broad categories of what the church should do based on all that we've learned, all that we've talked about for all of these generations, and for these cycles, these historical cycles and the cycles of the church I've talked about over the past couple of weeks. Remain updated. Technology is the wave of the future. Remain updated. Work to update your technology. Inclusion. Get rid of your inclusion issues. Be genuine. Work on being the same person you are at church, that you are at home, and that you are at work. Work to have dynamic blended worship. Dynamic blended worship, it appeals to all generations. When you do modern songs, traditional songs, and you do them in a variety of ways, and you're able to create this dynamic of blended worship, will appeal to all the generations at one time. Education that blends traditional and small group methods, and what this does is it allows your older generations to have some stability in the ways that they've always known on how to do, like Sunday school and things like that, but also allow the younger generations to do some more modern small group methods. If they want to meet in homes, let them meet in homes. If they want to use a different type of curriculum, offer multiple curriculums. Different generations are looking for different things out of their curriculums. Generation X and millennials are gonna want more apologetic curriculum than anything, and baby boomers are gonna want some of that curriculum that's going to reveal some of these deeper unknown things, these facts and stuff that they will pull out. So allow your groups and the generations to have different types of curriculum that they can choose from. Allow programming to evolve as traditions lose their meaning, as programs lose their effectiveness. Don't be afraid to change those things and to try new things and to see what's effective. The world is changing. And it's changing faster than we can keep up in a lot of cases. A lot of cases, the church is 5 to 10 years behind what we've seen the world change to. So allow programming to keep up so that we can stay effective reaching people with the gospel. And promote unity between the generations. We need to be passing on our knowledge, our knowledge of God, our knowledge of the Bible and theology, and how we do things, and the history of the church, and these rich traditions that have meaning. We need to be passing those things on to the generations, to the younger generation. So we need to find ways to include all generations together and find ways to allow older generations to mentor and teach these things to the younger generations. And finally, plan for the future. So when we talk about these cycles, we will soon enter a high cycle, a high era. So these creative strategies that we're pioneering now in this crisis era, you remember the church during a crisis tends to have some very creative strategies coming out of it. And these things are going to prepare us for the next high. They're going to stabilize us and prepare us for this next high. So during this next high era, the church is going to have the stability and resources to have unprecedented missional potential. During high eras, we tend to see a lot of heightened missional potential in the church, and we need to get ready for this and prepare for this. The missional efforts of the next 20 years may bring about a global revival movement during the next awakening era. So after this high, we will enter an awakening, and awakenings are characterized by tremendous revival movements. So we set the tone now with our creative strategies and the way we are reorganizing and re-envisioning the way we do things, which leads us to some stability and the ability to use our new strategies and our new stability and new resources to do missional efforts in a way that's been unprecedented for about 20 years. And then after that, that's going to set the tone and for a global revival movement. So this thing is sequential, it's cyclic. That's what we talk about, church cycles. That's where we are in the cycle. We are exiting a crisis era and will soon enter this high era where we will see heightened missional potential, should see heightened missional potential if the cycle continues. And so what we need to know about that is Generation Z will come of age during this next high era, which means this will be the next generation of missionaries. Generation Z has the potential to have some of the greatest missionaries we have seen in the past 100 years. The church should equip them now. Let's give them the resources and the education they need to be the missionaries that they could potentially be over the next 20 years. Millennials are going to enter middle age, and so they're going to be some of our strongest church leaders. So as they are transitioning into leadership roles, we also need to be equipping them to be the best leaders they can be. All right, so that takes us all the way to the end. That is all I have on generational unity and the strategies we can develop from studying the generations and their characteristics and the cycles of these generations and the cycles in the church as we prepare. I hope you've enjoyed it. I hope you've learned something. I hope you take this and apply it to your relationships as you interact with these generations. And more importantly, I hope that it gives you some excitement for the future of the church and the potential that we have as this generational unity moves forward into something that could potentially be a very exciting time of missional work for our church. And I hope that you will use this and share this stuff, share these videos, point other people to it, other churches to it, so that they can begin to learn from this as well. thank you so much for participating, for watching all these videos. God bless, and pray that you would have a great day.